Ready to get going. Yeah, thanks for letting me present. We've got a pretty interesting project that we've got going on with, I'd say it's easily a top 3 partner for us is Denver International Airport. And the neat thing is it's a collaborative effort between us, the airport, and really with NCAR and NOAA GSD in the building. And I'll talk about their roles because they're really driving this. We're just kind of making sure that we can meet the needs of what they find from our partner at DIA. So moving on to the next slide. So how do we get where we are now? Well, roughly 10 years ago, our office met DIA's needs as best as they could. DIA really needed some kind of probabilistic information on snowfall. And at that time, the best we could do was a subjective text-based probabilistic snow accumulation product. So we sent it out through AOPS. It's posted on our website. It goes to the FAA's system, IDS4 it's called, and they can access it that way or through the web. In any case, we were able to give them a roughly 6-hour probabilistic snowfall totals, but as I'm about to describe, it was very subjective. It also had a short-term and a long-term discussion, basically first 24 hours, next 24 hours. That was one of the more valuable things that DIA wanted 10 years ago. So in the old version, as you can see, that this is the output product. I'm not going to show you the GUI that we used to generate this, but suffice to say, it had a bunch of thresholds that we set by hand using slider bars in AWIPS for percentages up to 0 to 100 for various thresholds in 6-hour increments. In a nutshell, as a forecaster, we would incorporate all available data. So we would do our full analysis of what we think is going to happen at the airport based on, whatever model we're looking at and combination of models. Yes, we used ensemble data where available, like the SREF. And so then we would, again, it was all done manually, subjective information here. We couldn't use PWPF because, as you all know, that's a storm total product. They do ship it to us in 6-hour increments, but none of the programs that are available use the 6-hour increments. It just fills out a storm total snowfall or a 12-hour or a 24-hour, whatever you set it to locally, that's what you're going to get. But for DIA's purposes, even 10 years ago, that was definitely not enough time resolution on when to expect those periods of heavier snow. Even in 6-hour windows, that just wasn't enough. So that's where we were. That's where we were up until last year for the last 10 years, trying to meet the needs of DIA, doing this in a subjective manner. So then we partnered with GSD. They're literally in the hallway that my office is in, and they started a project with NCAR. Basically, what they were looking for is a focus on experiments that incorporated social science and probabilistic weather information. They're looking for an experiment that could hit both of those, check both those boxes. And it turns out that when they found out about our probabilistic snow accumulation product, that was a match made in heaven. And the fact it was, it's the 4th busiest airport in the US. It's frequently impacted by snow. It was just a perfect match just down the road from NCAR and from our building here. So they did a project over the past year, and I've got the title of it right there on that slide, Improved Presentation and Use of Probabilistic Forecast Products. And so NCAR's role in this clearly was on social science. They conducted numerous in-person interviews. And so they went straight to the airport and they talked to they talked to several planners. In other words, the people in the Denver EOC, DIA EOC, that make the call on how much staff what staffing level to come up with based on a forecast. So they talked to those decision makers, but they also talked to the field ops team. In other words, plow operators, the supervisors of those plow operators. They ended up interviewing between, I think it was around 18 to 20 people from both sides of the house, the planning and then the actual plow operators and plow supervisors. They also did a pretty interesting thing during the March blizzard last year, the bomb cyclone. They tagged along with plow operators, and the plow operator, and I quote, said, "I have never seen visibility this bad in my entire career." And he'd been plowing DIA for 25 years. They turned around because he wasn't sure where he was on those taxiways when they were plowing. So that was a first for him. and GSD staff or NCAR staff was able to be in the plow with them. That was pretty interesting. So what is GSD's role? They wanted to do a forecast verification using the SREF, the Hurry, and our PSA. I'm not going to talk much about that because that's a whole different presentation. I wanted to focus on the science behind the new PSA that we're doing. But the also neat thing that they helped us with was on tool development for the PSA product that we're using now. And throughout the whole process, we were kept in the loop on where they were going. So some early findings on the operational process, probably not going to be a surprise to most of you, but they really only cared about snow on the pavement, well, and wind, but really it's the snow on the pavement they care about. They don't care if it's falling through the air or landing on the grass. All the decisions made were based on how much is going to pile up on the runways. Another interesting early finding was that the personnel, and this is everyone from the field ops crew to the planners in the EOC, all of them shop forecasts. And because of that, it's up to 6 sources of forecasts. Weather Service is just one of them. Apparently they have 2 private sector contracts, and then they get forecasts from random other sources, probably AccuWeather, Weather Channel, wherever they can get the information. But they cited 6 different sources of information. And so what they do is days in advance, an individual will look at those forecasts and kind of have a mental picture, a mental ensemble of what he or she thinks is going to happen. And then they gather by the water cooler probably 2 days before and start going, hey, did you see the Weather Service's forecast? Our contractor X had this. What do you guys think? What do we really think is going to happen? Some sources are trusted more than others. Reading between the lines of the report, I mean, they didn't flat out say, oh, the Weather Service does a fantastic job, we trust them with our lives type of thing. The report didn't say that, but reading between the lines, it was pretty clear that they valued our information above most, if not all, of the other sources, which is a good thing. And in general, they planned for the higher amounts. That's kind of how they operate. So they have both planning and tactical phases prior to a snowfall event, and both of those phases have critical weather needs. So looking at the chart down here, again, 3 to 7 days prior, they're just monitoring, they're discussing, they're doing their self or group ensemble of, hey, what do we really think is going to happen based on the forecast? 1 to 2 days prior, it's much more in depth. They hold regular meetings to determine, what to do, what to plan for. And then the big decision is made at 10 a.m. and it's always going to be 10 a.m. So basically, if the event is that night, they'll make the decision 10 a.m. what to staff for. If it's the next day, they'll make the decision for 10 a.m. That's the big meeting, and that's an important data point for us as a forecast office, because we know when our input is most important, right at that 10 a.m. decision point. And then after that snow alert decision is made on how much to staff up, how much overtime to bring, then they just kind of monitor the forecast, look for changes, and then they wait for the first flakes to fall. They make pre-treating decisions then as well, depending on pavement temps and those types of things. Then snow begins and they enter the tactical phase. So what are the key things from the planning phase? Basically, we did find out that they still use our PSA, even that old version that was very subjective, but much less over recent years, because they have so much public sector or private sector probabilistic info. Just in the last few years, we don't get to see the products that they get from the private sector, but we know it contains probabilistic information, and that had only begun in just the last several years. So it's a little less they use our product. They still trust and value our discussion portion of the PSA for sure. They need much better details on the rates and better timing details and time resolution from our PSA and from all the weather information they receive. Finally, they only really need 4 accumulation thresholds. From the previous slide, our old PSA had trace 1 inch, 3 inch, 6 inch, and 10 inch. Turns out they don't even care about the 6 inches. Once they get up, they want to know if it gets up to about 10 inches, because then they declare a snow emergency. And that's 10 inches in 12 hours when they do that. The snow alert level, as I mentioned, is set between 10 a.m. before the event, 8 to 24 hours prior. They have all different kinds of levels that match what alert level they set. And it's basically related to staffing. Getting people in, they work 12-hour shifts, and so they plan ahead. If they're in an emergency or a level 1, they can call in as many people as they need to meet that ahead of time. And that's why they always want to do it prior to the event, because if you guys have ever been to DIA, conditions can go south real quick just getting to the airport. So that's why they're always planning, 8 to 24 hours ahead so they can get their crews to the airport to work their 12-hour shifts. During the tactical stage, these are the types of decisions that they are making. They're wondering if they need to close runways temporarily or permanently, which treatments to apply, which equipment to use, because they have all different kinds of plows and snow throwers and all that kind of stuff. They're also coordinating with airlines and the FAA on arrival and departure rates, because that's always key. And it depends on how many runways they can keep open, on what rate they can maintain. And they told us it takes about 15 minutes to clear a runway. So they have to shut that runway down while they're clearing it for 15 minutes. Worst case scenario, they have to make the call to close the entire airfield. And that occurs when they can't clear the runways fast enough or even keep one runway open fast enough. So their tactical needs for weather, we found out through the study that they want sub-hourly updates on wind, snow rate, and runway temps. Sign us up, right? No, that can't be our role. That is very unrealistic. That is the vendor's role. That is the main reason they have a contractor for this. I can't imagine we would need to dedicate a full-time person, probably half of another time person, before, during, and after a snow event just to keep up with that type of demand. Ain't gonna happen. That is the vendor's role. We kind of stay out of those tactical decision needs. However, we do talk to them on the phone often. The Denver EOC likes talking to us. They like having that human input, especially from our office, because we're a trusted source of information. So 2 to 3 times during an event, depending on how long it is, they will call us directly and just ask for our opinion on, when's the heaviest snow coming? When's it going to end? Those types of questions during the tactical phase. I also mentioned we do contact, and if we haven't heard from them in a while and we know things are going south, because we use FlightAware to track incoming and outgoing flights. And so if we start seeing incoming flights doing circles out there, we know things aren't going very well there because they haven't planned to the right arrival rate. A lot of times that will prompt us to call them as well and just say, hey, this is what we got going on. This is what we think is going to happen. The key tactical info for DIA during this is how long will the chemical and sand treatment of snow removal keep the runway clear enough for planes to land? Again, that we can't really provide that information. We can only provide kind of the weather piece of that. So summarizing their needs, I've got just the charts here. They care about snow, runway temperature, and winds, and everything you can imagine in terms of snow. Rates, ending, any banding, heavier snow. If there's any lulls in the snow, they want to know about them. Those types of things, again, that's beyond the scope of what we can provide during the tactical phase, but we try and do our best during the planning phase to highlight when the heaviest snow is going to fall, our best bet on when we think it's going to end, and all those types of things. And that goes into the end product, as I'll show in a minute. So key takeaways for us, and I know there's some offices out there that also have major airports. I can't imagine they operate any differently than DIA does. But one of our key takeaways, but it's all about the concrete, the taxiways, the runways. All they care about is the snow accumulation on those taxiways and runways. So when we do the newer version of the PSA that I'm about to show you, we try and focus or do our best on how much accumulation we expect on the runways. To that end, we do have access to the runway temperatures at DIA, so that does help. We can see if it's already below freezing. We know that any snow that's going to occur from that point on is going to stick to the runways. But it's still a challenge because it's not the best sampled temperature for a runway that we could have. So it's a little bit of a challenge doing it that way, but that's what they need. We're going to try and meet it. DIA does hedge their operations levels towards the high end. We figured that out. Snow rates and frequency of updated information, they always need more, especially as it relates to their mid-morning and early evening pushes. Those times are critical. That's when they need to have their most arrival and departure gates or arrival rates during that time. So we try and focus on those areas too. Like if we think there's going to be really heavy snow during that time, we will let them know in the product and in the discussion part of it. Surprisingly, and this might surprise some of you, the uncertainty, they understand uncertainty at DIA. Even the plow operators understand the inherent uncertainty of forecasting for snow. And so basically they told us that they mainly focus on when we are highly confident. So if we're putting 80s, 90s, and 100s in like the 3-inch or more bin for 3 hours, they're pretty sure that heavy snow is going to occur, and they're absolutely going to plan for the heavy snow if we're that confident in it. The last piece I'm going to cover is the new design of the PSA product that we've been using just for this season. It uses a configurable ensemble of GFE models, just the QPF, the liquid part of it as a first guess, and it uses those in 3-hour time steps. Think model certainty, but on 3-hour time steps. That's the way the code's written. And it's configurable. I think you can use up to as many sources as you want. I think we use about 9 different sources short term, and then down to 6 sources in the beyond 36 hours once the HUR is no longer available. How we get the snowfall amount is we just use the official snow ratio, whatever the official grid snow ratio is at those grid points around the airport, then it multiplies the QPF by that. And instead of we don't use just a grid point centered on the airport, because we wanted to try and capture banded events if we could. So instead, it's a 10 by 10 grid centered on the airport. The theory there is that hopefully we catch, because it's a little bit bigger area we're averaging over, maybe we catch a band that's only across maybe the northern part of that grid, that 10 by 10 grid in GFE. Maybe we catch it, hopefully we do. That's configurable too. We can change the size of the edit area that we use to compute this over. So as I mentioned, we do it every 3 hours out to 48 hours. If the GFE data is available hourly, which sometimes it is with the HUR data, we just sum it up there. If it's a 6-hour grid, the code just cuts it directly in half. So that's going to have its own little interesting things with that. We also preserve the previous product info as best as we can, but you can always use the latest model amounts if you want to. The neat thing is 2 forecasters can edit it at the same time if we happen to split. If the event splits over whatever time frame the forecasters are working, we can do it that way. And in the end, the text output is similar to the old version, but it's set to their key thresholds. DIA actually didn't want much of a different format to the text. What they really wanted was a graphical depiction, and that's coming in the next steps. But before we get to the final slide on the next steps, I wanted to show you what the GUI looks like. So you'll notice in the top, the short-term discussion, that's for the first 24 hours. Long-term discussion is just for the next day, basically, the next 24 hours. And then I was wrong. We actually use 19 members. So it is a lot like model certainty there. We use 19 members as they're available in the short term. If I were to click that box, it would show what those ensemble members come up with for the first 3 hours. Otherwise, it defaults to whatever the previous forecast was. And you can do that in the 3-hour time steps all the way out. On the far end, again, for the snow emergencies, they care about 10 inches in 12 hours. So there's an area for that here and here. And then again, in the other 12-hour periods further down the list. But basically, it's still somewhat of a manual process if you want to deviate off the models, and a lot of times we do. But it's given us a much better starting point and much more scientific starting point using probabilistic information. We issue this product 4 times a day. These are all local times, 2:30 a.m. The one in red, that's the important one. We get it out before 9:30, then 2:30, and then again at 8 p.m. local time. Those are the times important to the airport when they want this product. So next steps, some of you might be interested in this. I've talked to the coder in GSD, and he's confident it can be configured for just about any airport with just a little bit of work in the script. And you could even do multiple airports with a little bit of coding tricks. We are considering doing it for our other pretty big airport, Centennial down in South Denver. They call us all the time before and during snow. So I think this product would be pretty useful for them once we iron out some of the wrinkles there. For graphical output, that is one of the major next steps because DIA, all the operators there and the decision makers, we've talked to them. They get their information from graphical output from private sector vendors. They also use our text product, which is great, but they would love it if we could do ours in graphical. So the next step is getting a grant for a social scientist to design with DIA's input a graphical version of this. And so that is coming. If you guys know Jen Henderson, a very well-known social scientist, she's in our building. She's going to be the one spearheading that whole project, the whole graphical output. And finally, the last piece is they are going to do much more verification on this. They only did 1 year verification. It was not a good snow year for DIA. They had one big event that was banded. The rest were really light events. So it was really weird. The stats came out really weird. So they're going to verify it again this year, hopefully get some much more information and use the MBM because they did not use that in the first time they did verification. So now I can take some questions.